for Jesus Christ's redemption of us as miserable offenders. And we say yes. We do say yes. We say yes because we have a new nature which always says yes to God, although the flesh fights against it. This is what I do want. This is what I know is good for me. This is what I know will build me up. This will help. That's what I want. Now all these obedient and grateful people of God, having a day off, as we would say, for a religious festival, namely the Feast of Trumpets, all these obedient, grateful people came to Jerusalem to hear expository preaching. That was what they wanted. Not fluff, not pantomimes, expository preaching. And there were an awful lot of them. The previous chapter says, Nehemiah 7, verse 66, the whole congregation together was 42,360. And that's apart from the manservants and maidservants. And there were 7,337 of them. And then there were also 245 singing men and singing women. So putting all that together, you get roughly 50,000 people. And if that 50,000 people includes maidservants and maid singers, females, presumably it includes wives. 50,000, not presumably, I'm guessing now, reasoning it out, not presumably including children. They're not counted in the genealogies and censuses rather of Numbers 1 and Numbers 26. So you get 50,000 men and women. And then the passage speaks about all those who could understand the reading and preaching of the Scriptures. That would include 12-year-olds and so on. So you get a larger group, although maybe some of the women stayed with some of the smaller children. But at very least, we have 50,000 odd people. Verse 1 even says, all the people gathered themselves. Everyone who could be there was there. All of them. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. And that's the way it is when God's Spirit is at work in the body and the members of the body. So you've got roughly 50,000 plus people where they're not going to fit in the court that's around the new temple, because it's a much smaller temple than Solomon's temple. It's Zerubbabel's temple, which is just being built. So you've got to choose a wide open space for 50,000 plus people, assuming these calculations are more or less correct. And the conclusion was, there's a street or plaza or open area before the water gate. It could hold several tens of thousands will meet there. This, of course, doesn't solve all the problems with such a sizable gathering. How are all these people going to see and hear the speaker? Because they want expository preaching of the Scriptures. Answer? The answer they came to was, well, we need a special platform or pulpit made of wood, newly built. Where are our carpenters? We'll make one. Verse 4 says that Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood which they had made for the purpose. That verse goes on to speak of 6 men on his right and 7 on his left, leaders in Israel. And if these men were on the pulpit, then it means an even bigger pulpit. But besides all that, we at least know this, that there was some planning given to this day of expository preaching, because you don't just come up with a pulpit like this and bang it together in a few minutes and start right on time. There was some work and thought went into this day of expository preaching. I should add this bit too, by the way, so to speak, that this refutes the strange view that the minister should not be on a raised platform. I remember hearing this in a video with a dispensationalist man probably about 15 years ago, and he said that a minister on any sort of a raised platform was the sin of the Nicolaitans. mentioned in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. And it just showed how proud ministers are. So he was speaking on this occasion, and he was in an auditorium whereby the people were seated higher than him and he was down. This was the sin of the Nicolaitans that he was avoiding. That struck me. I read Revelation 2 and 3, and for all the life of me, couldn't work out how in the wide world that was the sin of the Nicolaitans, and I've been reading Revelation for 15 years since, and I haven't come up with anything either. But this passage explains to us that the pulpit here, and therefore the man in the pulpit, is above the people. And the idea of the minister being above the people isn't that he's somehow better than everybody else, or we want to inflate his pride. The minister is in a pulpit, especially in a larger gathering, and he's raised up so that he can be seen, so that he can be heard better, so that his voice will carry, so that in the expository preaching, it's not just a man that you can't see speaking in a voice you can't hear. That would defeat the purpose. Verse 5 says, Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people. They could see him, for he was above all the people. You get 50,000 people and you're in the same level as they are, only a very few will be able to see you. So much for that. On this occasion, the speakers included, first of all, Ezra, the scribe and priest. He's mentioned in verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 as the main speaker, and he's mentioned again in verse 9. In verse 2 we have Ezra reading the law, and in verse 6 he is blessing the people from this pulpit, which seems especially to have been made for him. Apparently, though, even with this pulpit, not everybody could hear Ezra, or he couldn't keep going for 6 hours flat out. And so Ezra wasn't the only speaker. Verse 7 mentions 13 men, and from verse 7 and chapter 9 it would appear that these 13 men were Levites. So these 13 men therefore either took over the speaking when Ezra was tired, or else the 50,000 plus would have been portioned off into sections, and one of the 13 would be speaking to this group over here, and another one would be speaking to this group over there, so that everybody could hear. Now, if you've been reading this passage especially closely, you might object that it doesn't actually say that Ezra expounded or explained the scriptures. The passage does expressly say that Ezra read the law and he blessed the people, but verses 7 and 8 speaks of they caused the people to understand the law, and they read the law distinctly and gave the sense, and they could be read to refer only to Ezra, only to the Levites rather, excluding Ezra. But we need to see the bigger picture. I'm thinking especially of the introduction of Ezra in Ezra chapter 7. Ezra 7 verse 6 says that Ezra went up from Babylon, returning to the promised land of Judah and Jerusalem. Ezra went up from Babylon as a ready scribe in the law of Moses. He's a skilled student of the Pentateuch, poring over that Hebrew text, knowing how the passages are to be interpreted and explained and compared and contrasted with other passages in the Word of God. And then verse 10 says, Ezra had prepared his heart to seek or study or search the law of God and to do it. And, this is the key point we're interested in at this stage, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments.